ATP of skeletal muscles. Energy of skeletal muscles. Lecture -3. ATP of skeletal muscles. Objectives. Recognize the importance of ATP as energy source in skeletal muscle. Understand how skeletal muscles derive and utilize ATP for energy. Differentiate between energy metabolism in red and white muscle fibers. ATP. ATP or adenosine triphosphate is the energy currency used by our body every day to perform a number of tasks. Maintain body temperature. Repair damaged cells. Digestion of food. Mechanical work, movement. ATP, left-right arrow, ATP+. Energy. ATP is the most important form of chemical energy stored in cells. Breakdown of ATP into ADP plus P.O. 4 releases energy. Muscles typically store limited amounts of ATP enough to power 4 to 6 seconds of activity. So resting muscles must have energy stored in other ways. Systems of generation of ATP. 1 ATP-creatine phosphate system. 2 glycolytic system. 3 oxidative system. The process that facilitates muscular contraction is entirely dependent on body's ability to provide and rapidly replenish ATP. Interaction of energy systems. Immediate, short-term, long-term, energy transfer systems and exercise. 100% capacity of energy system. Anaerobic glycolysis. Aerobic energy system. ATP-creatine phosphate. 10 seconds. 30 seconds. 2 minutes. 5+ min. Exercise time. Energy systems for muscular exercise. Mole of ATP per minute. Time to fatigue. Immediate, ATP-CP. ATP and creatine phosphate. 5 to 10 seconds. Short-term, glycolytic. Glycogen lactic acid. 2.5. 1 to 2 minutes. Long-term, oxidative. 1. Unlimited time. Energy requirements. The 3 energy systems often operate simultaneously during physical activity. However, relative contribution of each system to total energy requirement differs depending on exercise intensity and duration. Magnitude of energy from anaerobic sources depends on person's capacity and tolerance for lactic acid accumulation. Athletes are trained so that they will have better tolerance for lactic acid. As exercise intensity diminishes and duration extends beyond 4 minutes, energy more dependent on aerobic metabolism. Fatigued muscle no longer contracts due to muscle fatigue. Fatigued muscle no longer contracts due to 1. Accumulation of lactic acid, low pH of sarcoplasm. 2. Exhaustion of energy resources, ADP and ATP. 3. Ionic imbalance, muscle cells is less responsive to motor neuronal stimulation. What are the mechanisms by which muscle fibers obtain energy to power contractions? Muscles and fiber types. White muscle, glycolytic. Mostly fast fibers. Pale, for example chicken breast. Red muscle, oxidative. Mostly slow fibers. Dark, for example chicken legs. Most human muscles are mixed fibers. Pink, fast versus slow fibers. Type I. Type II, slow fibers, abundant mitochondria, extensive capillary supply. High concentrations of myoglobin. Can contract for long periods of time. Fatigue resistant. Obtain their ATP mainly from fatty acids oxidation by TCA cycle and etc. Oxidative phosphorylation. Fast fibers, large glycogen reserves, relatively few mitochondria. produce rapid and powerful contractions, but of short duration, easily fatigued. Obtain their ATP mainly from anaerobic glycolysis. Energy requirements and source of energy for skeletal muscle, resting versus working. ATP use in the resting muscle cell. During periods of muscular rest, ATP is required for 1. Glycogen synthesis, glycogenesis, i.e. storage form of glucose to be used during muscular exercise. 2. Creatine phosphate production, i.e. energy storage compound to be used at the beginning of muscular contraction. Source of ATP in resting muscle fibers. Resting muscle fibers takes up free fatty acids from blood. Fatty acids are oxidized, in the mitochondria, to produce acetyl-CoA and molecules of NOD and FOD2. Acetyl-CoA will then enter the citric acid cycle, in the mitochondria, ATP, NOD, FOD2 and CO2. NOD and FOD2 will enter the electron transport chain. Synthesis of ATP. Resting muscle fibers metabolism. Figure 1020a. ATP sources in working muscle. At the beginning of exercise, muscle fibers immediately use stored ATP. For the next 15 seconds, muscle fibers turn to the creatine phosphate. This system dominates in events such as the 100 meters dash or lifting weights. ATP sources in working muscle cont. After the phosphagon system is depleted, the process of anaerobic glycolysis can maintain ATP supply for about 45–60 s. Glycogen stored in muscles: glucose 2-pyruvic acid plus 2 ATPs. 2-pyruvic acid 2 lactic acid. Lactic acid diffuses out of muscles: blood, liver, glucose, by gluconeogenesis, blood muscles. It usually takes a little time for the respiratory and cardiovascular systems to catch up with the muscles and supply O2 for aerobic metabolism, working muscle fibers metabolism. Figure 1020c. ATP sources in working muscle cont. Anaerobic metabolism is inefficient. One large amount of glucose are used for very small ATP returns. 2 lactic acid is produced, leading to muscle fatigue. Type of sports uses anaerobic metabolism. Sports that requires bursts of speed and activity, for example basketball. ATP sources in working muscle cont. Aerobic metabolism occurs when the respiratory and cardiovascular systems have caught up with the working muscles. During rest and light to moderate exercise, aerobic metabolism contributes 95% of the necessary ATP. Compounds which can be aerobically metabolized include fatty acids, pyruvic acid, made from glucose via glycolysis, and amino acids. Working muscle fibers metabolism. Aerobic versus anaerobic sources of energy. No requires oxygen. Source of energy. Only carbohydrate, anaerobic glycolysis. End products. Lactate and ATP. Aerobic. Require oxygen. Source of energy. Mainly fatty acids, then carbohydrate. End products. CO2, H2O and ATP, the Cori cycle and the glucose-alanine cycle. The Cori cycle: liver converts lactate into glucose via gluconeogenesis. The newly formed glucose is transported to muscle to be used for energy again. The glucose-alanine cycle. Muscles produce 1 pyruvate from glycolysis during exercise. 2 NH2 produced from normal protein degradation. Pyruvate plus NH2-alanine. Alanine is transported through the blood to liver. Liver converts alanine back to pyruvate. Alanine, NH2 equals pyruvate. Pyruvate is converted to glucose, gluconeogenesis. Glucose is transported to muscle to be used for energy again. Liver converts NH2 to urea for excretion, urea cycle.